Hi, so for this video I'm going to be talking about single needle and the pros and cons, what goes on when you're using single needle. So I have a lot of experience using strictly single needle, so I've found out a lot of things about what to do, what not to do. So hopefully this will give you a lot of insight into single needle. I'm going to be using the 3-round liner to compare, just so I can explain these things to you better, because the way 3-round liner behaves and the way 1-round liner behaves, it's very different, even though they both produce fine line tattoos. So it'll be very helpful to use that to help explain. Okay, so the first thing I should talk about is the ink flow. So using the 3-round liner, for example, the 3-round liner carries ink a lot better than the 1-round liner because it has 3 needles, right? The ink can go in between the 3 needles, whereas if we're going to use a single needle, there's just 1 needle. So all we have is the surface around that 1 needle to carry and transfer the ink from the cartridge to the skin. Because of that, single needle has a lot of ink flow problems, and I'm sure you would know if you've tried it before. I feel like that's a big reason why a lot of people give up on using single needle. So what affects ink flow on the 1-round liner? Well, cartridge quality definitely affects it. So Quadrant is a good brand. I've used legacy needles from Needle Jig, recommended by my previous coworker Ariel. I have used Unimax brand single needle cartridges. Those are garbage, not good at all. So, also Cheyenne single needle is horrible. Even though Cheyenne is a great company, I expected their single needle to work really well, but the ink flow is so bad. So again, really be careful with your single needle cartridge brands, because there's such high fluctuations in ink flow based on what you're using. So yeah, beware. Ink itself, the ink quality and its qualities might affect ink flow too. So let's say I'm using the dynamic black ink right now. No problems with ink flow in terms of that. Whereas some colored inks, it's very thick, or it just the ink flow is horrible with color. So that's why when I render color in my fine line tattoos, I typically go for 3-round liners to do that, because it has that extra space in between the 3 needles to transfer the ink, right? What's next? Machine quality. Does that really affect it? I think it might. Machine slash voltage, so how much power are you using to let that needle hit? I guess if it's too weak. Anyways, I don't think that affects that much. So what do we have here? So we have needle and cartridge quality. That's a big one. That's going to affect ink flow. Ink quality. Yes, it will affect ink flow. Machine quality, maybe, but I don't have that much to say about it. So okay, so we got through that. I want to talk now, within the ink flow category, I want to talk about the stroke length. So that means how far the needle goes out when you run the machine. So some people like to tattoo with the needle peeking out just a little bit, because that really improves ink flow, because it doesn't travel far from the cartridge tube that carries all the ink, right? Ink might spill out easier by doing that. That's why I don't like using a short stroke. I like using a long stroke, because I can see where the needle hits the skin better. But that compromises ink flow. But sometimes you want that because let's say if you want lighter shading or thinner lines, that long stroke might give you that extra lightness. So sometimes I extend the needle out longer just so I can have a little bit less ink flow, but not enough where it messes up the entire ink flow, so I won't be able to tattoo. But it does change it enough where I get lighter lines and shading because of that. So watch out for stroke length as well. That might affect your ink flow. So another thing that affects ink flow is, in the beginning you start out with a fresh cup of ink. Your cartridge is, brand new. You open it from the packet, use it clean. But over time, the ink starts getting mixed with blood and plasma because you're hitting the skin, tattooing, little amounts of blood come out. You dip it in the ink cup, it mixes in, what I like to think about is when blood dries, it's very, it coagulates, it does whatever blood and plasma does, so that might affect the drying of the ink over time. And even the ink cup sitting there is going to dry naturally, right? So you might want to change the ink cup. If it's a shorter session, I might not even change it at all, but for the longer ones, I might change it. So the ink cup should be replaced. What about the cartridge? That's even more important. So after every break, which is about an hour to an hour and a half into the session, so hour and a half in, I'll take a break, 3 hours in, I'll take a break. Each time I take a break, I clean the needle. So I'm going to show you a video of how I like to clean my single needle cartridge. Each time I take a break, I do that. It'll keep your needle fresh, ink flow going well, and yeah, you won't have as much ink flow problems if you do that. So another thing about single needle cartridge versus 3 round liner cartridge is when you clean the cartridge needle with a piece of paper, it's fine. You can hit it on the paper, it'll be fine. But with 3 needles, when you hit the paper might get stuck in the 3 round liners. So sometimes early on in my career, when I was using 3 round liner and I would clean it with a piece of paper, right, and then start tattooing again, the ink flow is just completely different. Is it the machine? Is it the needle? Is it the ink? Over time, I learned that there's a piece of paper stuck in between the 3 needles. You can't see it, or you can if you look closely. So if you're having that problem, try looking for that. But anyways, if it's 1 needle, you won't have that problem because there's nowhere for it to get stuck, right? Cool, okay, let's move on. So what's next? Next big thing is skin tension. So skin tension is also a lot different when you're using a single needle versus 3 or more, right? Think of it this way. So if you're a magician and you do the trick where you're laying on a bed of needles, you're going to be safe because the weight is distributed among all the needles on the bed. So it takes a lot more weight or energy to press down to get punctured. But if that needle bed was just one needle, you lay on that bed, it's going straight through the body. So apply that to single needle tattooing. There's very little skin tension when you're tattooing with one needle versus 3. So blowing out the skin is so much easier. So what do? So you lower the voltage. You use a machine that isn't as hard hitting. So right now I use the Solnova pen. Thank you to Ava and Jing for recommending that, because I was using the Scion pen before that, also very light, but I noticed that the Solnova was even lighter and softer, which is great for single needle work. And the voltage I use before I switched to Solnova was around 6 volts. So that's very low, but you don't need that much energy to run a single needle to tattoo. If you do, you're gonna you're gonna cut the skin, you're going to blow out the tattoo, you're gonna really chew up the skin. So yeah, be very careful with voltage, be careful with the machine you're using, and control your depth. So if you're using a 5 round liner, if you're using a 14 round liner, controlling your depth is much easier because the skin tension really absorbs a lot of the weight you're applying. So I mean, of course you can still blow it out if you're very heavy-handed, but it's a lot easier to blow out one needle than multiple needles. So your depth control, your hand control is that much more demanding if you're using single needle. Okay, next thing about single needle. So many things about single needle that you gotta watch out for. Okay, next thing I'm gonna talk about is your line quality when you use single needle versus a 8 round liner. So if you pull a line with a 8 round liner, right, a thicker needle group, your lines always look cleaner than you do with a single needle. Why? Because let's use a marker. So let's use a very fine point marker to draw a line versus a thick marker to draw a line. You're gonna notice the shakes a lot easier than the thicker one. If you're using a thinner one, you see the shakiness a lot more. So if you switch from a thicker needle group to a very thin one, or even a 3 round liner, you can see all the imperfections a lot more. So now it's more demanding on your hand control. So first it's the skin tension, so you have to control your depth much more. Now we're talking about line quality, so now you got to control your X plane versus the Y plane, right? Am I saying that right? So now you gotta be more mindful about that now. Also, I feel like skin tension affects the line shakiness too. So if you have more tension, so if you're using the 8 round liner, right? The skin tension, you need more to break the skin tension. So because of that skin tension, I feel like it almost smooths out your line in a way. I could be wrong, but I've always been wondering, why is it that thicker needle groups look so much cleaner than a thinner one? Recently I tattooed using a 5 and it was a cakewalk. Whereas the 1, now I'm experienced enough to do it, effortlessly. But it's such a big difference. it could very well be that skin tension that helps. Single needle, very little skin tension, so there's no natural correction or natural smoothing out of the lines. Again, I could be wrong, but I have a good feeling about what I'm saying. Okay, so here's another one to be mindful of. This is common sense, but if you're going to use one needle, it's going to take a lot more time to render the entire tattoo using a single needle versus a 3 or a mag. So it's very slow to use now, single needle. Yeah, so my tattoos, I don't go very big because even something like this size can take an entire day if it's detailed enough. And because I am stubborn, I typically render an entire tattoo using the single needle. So because of that, I've developed some techniques to speed it up, or if I'm, or I developed a lot of textures I could use to, or I just naturally gotten faster, just so I can finish the damn thing and, go home. So yeah, it takes even longer to tattoo if you're using one needle. Okay, what's next? I've talked about all the, if we're saying pros and cons, I talked a lot about the cons, right? So, it's getting dark. So what are the pros of using a single needle? It will give you the thinnest possible lines. It will give you the finest details, so a lot of control with the single needle. So if I have this tiny little spot that is lacking in contrast, I can really target that little spot with one needle. If I'm using 3, it gets a little harder. If I'm using a magnum, it's possible by using the very edge of the magnum to target that one little space. But there's room for mistakes, because these might hit it as well as this. So you might, it's a lot easier with one needle. So there's a lot of control. I feel like you can get the smoothest possible shading as well. But the main thing is you have so much, you can do so much in terms of detail with single needle. If you go over all the hurdles that we've discussed earlier, all the cons, then some of the stuff that I've been posting I can never do with 3 round liner. Well, I might, but no, I can't. Or magnum. It's just, I love the detail of it. So if you are in love with detail and you're willing to sacrifice the time, the energy spent mastering it, all the other little things that prevent you from comfortably tattooing if you're using a single needle versus another needle grouping, then it is well worth the cons. It doesn't sound like there's a lot of pros, right? What else is there to talk about? I guess, oh yeah, another pro is I see the insertion so clearly when I'm using a single needle with a long stroke. 3 is always a little bit of a mystery where exactly I'm hitting, because of that skin tension. That little bit of extra skin tension really matters. That one needle, very little skin tension, I can see where it's hitting, and there's no movement. It is exactly where it is. That's why it gives me so much control over my details. If you're crazy OCD like me and the detail matters, then there's nothing else like single needle. Also, because of its high learning curve, not many people know how to use it. So that's an extra boost in its appeal, right? I kind of like that. So So, yeah, I think I've talked about everything. Yeah, I feel like I talked about everything now. Hopefully, this will give you enough information to understand more about single needle, whether or not you want to move to this style, or if you're just interested in hearing about it, or if you're interested in getting a single needle tattoo, you will know a lot more about what goes into it. So, okay, yeah.